Story 1. Guardians of the Grove. I've always found solace in the desolate landscapes of Arizona. My name is Ethan, and I've been a park ranger here for what feels like my whole adult life. This one year, though, memories of which I find hard to shake off, was unlike any I'd ever faced. We had to combat an outbreak of wildfires, and boy were they vicious. One could say I've seen my fair share of flames, but nothing quite like this. Our skies turned crimson, the air saturated with an acrid aroma, and the very soil seemed to shudder beneath the onslaught of Mother Nature's wrath. As the days became a haze of efforts to suppress the fires, we found allies in a team of blaze firefighters. They came from different parts, but there was this innate understanding, a common purpose to rescue our lands from the relentless flames. Mapping out the affected regions, I found myself using a flurry of colors to mark certain sensitive zones on our incident maps. Green for areas teeming with endangered wildlife, yellow for spots rumored to hold illegal pot farms, and red, always red, for the First Nations lands, sacred grounds bearing the weight of centuries of culture and history. The days melded into one another, time losing meaning. It could have been a week or more when we partnered with a First Nations crew. They were familiar with the sacred terrains, and their knowledge was invaluable as we navigated through these culturally poignant patches. One such evening, as nightfall draped a cloak of darkness, a stillness settled upon us. Tiredness weighed down every limb, a result of battling smoke-filled air and scarce hours of rest. However, what I perceived as routine took a turn for the eerie. I recall leaning against an old, gnarled tree when suddenly our radio, our only connection to the outside world, started spewing static. No voices, no updates, just a constant buzz. Struggling against the tendrils of sleep, a jolt of adrenaline hit me, the way you'd snap awake from a nightmare. Before me, faint, almost ethereal figures wandered. Their movements reminded me of Obi-Wan's ghostly form. Every time one went behind a tree, they'd vanish. Just as quickly as they appeared, they were gone. Now, mind you, I've always been a skeptic, laughing off ghost stories over campfires. But there was something so visceral about that experience. While I'd like to attribute it to mere hallucinations from exhaustion, a part of me deep down knows there's more to that story. After what seemed like ages, my radio crackled back to life. Friends from the base reached out, checking on our status. Their voices, a reminder of the world outside, grounded me. As days turned into weeks and the fires receded, these tales became campfire stories, shared but with a grain of skepticism. The flames might have died down, but their embers will forever burn in my memories. Whenever I sit down with fellow rangers and firefighters now, recounting tales of our adventures, there's always someone who brings up that eerie night, reminding us that some stories are better left untold. Story 2. Twilight Pursuit. David had always been someone who liked the unusual, something that stood out from the norm. So, when he had told his buddies that his first job straight out of the collegiate grind was as a budding ranger for the National Park Service, some had laughed. But for him, the charm lay in the unknown, the serenity of the woods, and the thrill of the wild. The expanse of Northern California had called to him like a siren, its majestic pines, roaring rivers, and the myriad of secrets it held. This job was more than just manning the tourist booths and explaining the importance of not feeding the wildlife. One of the more unique responsibilities had him and his team out in the twilight hours, with the sole purpose of communicating with the night's denizens. Their mission? To carry out a survey protocol using all-terrain vehicles or ATVs, navigating the tricky terrains right after sunset. The aim was simple: halt at intervals, emit owl hoots, and keenly listen for a response. It was more than just a task. It was an experience, something that bordered on the magical, having a conversation with nature. On one such eerily calm evening, David found himself navigating a deserted logging road that hugged the river tightly, its waters shimmering under the pale glow of the setting sun. The silence of the night was punctuated by the hum of his ATV and the distant hoots of nocturnal birds. As he continued, a blur from the periphery of his vision pulled his attention. It happened so swiftly. One moment he was alone. The next, a creature of the dark was shadowing his path. A black bear, though not fully grown, had appeared seemingly out of nowhere, pacing the ATV just a mere 5 feet ahead. Panic surged through David. He instinctively eased on the brakes to prevent a disastrous collision. But an even more daunting thought struck him. Where was its mother? Legends had been passed down about protective mother bears in the region, of unsuspecting travelers who faced the fury of a mother protecting her cub. And this one, small and seemingly alone, had David expecting a sudden strike from behind. His heartbeat drummed in his ears, louder than the ATV's engine, imagining the feel of a clawed swipe across his back. Time seemed to stretch infinitely in those precarious moments. The bear continued its frantic pace on the road ahead, but what felt like hours to David was merely a handful of seconds. And then, just as suddenly as it had appeared, the bear took its exit, darting into the vast expanse of the forest. Once certain of the bear's departure, adrenaline pushed David's hand to rev the ATV's throttle, the need to get as far away as possible coursing through his veins. In hindsight, he reasoned that the bear was perhaps a yearling, most likely having left its mother's side, venturing out on its own. But in that heart-stopping moment on the logging road, terror had painted a different story. David later shared this spine-chilling encounter by the fireside, his voice bringing the haunting melody of nature to those who listened. And as the tale ended, a soft voice echoed through the gathering, urging everyone to venture deeper into the mysteries of nature, inviting them to be part of a community that sought the unknown. A soft tune played in the background, encapsulating the night's essence, inviting others to join in and become a part of this ever-unfolding narrative of man and wild. Story 3. Echoes of the Haunting Bend. For a decade, I wore the uniform of the National Park Service, the forest green, the embroidered badge, the well-worn hiking boots. Over time, the park's secrets became mine, its hushed whispers and the wind-tossed tales of the treetops. But there was one day, one echoing moment that remains etched like a scar on my psyche. It began just like any other day in the vast expanse of nature's grandeur. The sun cast a golden hue over the dirt road as my patrol vehicle rumbled along its familiar path. However, the serenity was soon shattered by a plume of black smoke that billowed into the azure sky, forming a smoky beacon for impending dread. My first thought was a wildfire, a rampant beast this park is all too familiar with. But nature wasn't the beast I would encounter that day. Rounding a bend, the shocking sight took a moment to fully register. A van, not just parked, but positioned strategically in the middle of the path as if to say, "Behold my final act." It was ablaze, a metal coffin consumed by a fiery rage. The melting rubber tires hissed and spat, while muffled pops and bursts emanated from within the vehicle, making it sound almost alive, a creature in agony. A naive part of me hoped someone had merely dumped the van, setting it afire in an act of delinquency. But that hope was smothered when I reported the blazing vehicle, only to be informed of the even grimmer truth. Inside that inferno had been a soul, a man who had made the unthinkable choice to end his life in this gruesome manner. I wondered, as chills ran down my spine, what drove him to this, to choose such an agonizing end in a place of such beauty. The van hadn't collided with anything. It was clear this wasn't an accident. Days later, whispers spread that the tormented soul had been struggling with personal demons. But what truly haunted me wasn't just the horror of his end, but the questions that lingered. Why here? Why in this fashion? Each time I passed that stretch of road, a cold weight settled in my stomach. Even now, as the trees sway and whisper their ancient tales, the eerie notes of an unheard melody haunt my thoughts, a chilling reminder of a life lost in the most inexplicable of ways. Every so often, late at night, when the world of the park becomes a symphony of chirping crickets and distant owls, I hear whispers among the rangers. They speak of other oddities around that particular bend, tales passed down from older rangers to greenhorns like me. Some say the stretch of road is cursed, attracting souls with its eerie, unseen pull. Others believe it to be a hotspot of supernatural activity, where the line between this world and the next blurs, beckoning those in pain to cross over. One evening, during a particularly grueling overnight shift, I had an encounter that made me question everything. As I drove near the bend, Radio chatter dimmed, and a soft, melancholic melody filled the air. No source, just a tune that echoed of despair. I hit the brakes, listening, and felt a frosty breath on the back of my neck. Turning around slowly, the empty back seat greeted me, but the mournful tune lingered. The following week, I visited Miss Beatrice, an elderly local renowned for her extensive knowledge of park lore. Over a steaming cup of herbal tea, she recounted the tale of a musician who, many decades ago, lost his family in a tragic accident near that same bend. Devastated and unable to cope, he played a final haunting melody on his violin before taking his own life. Locals claimed his spirit never left, and his sad tune is a testament to a heart forever broken. Miss Beatrice leaned closer, her voice a hushed whisper. "They say if you hear the melody, he wants you to know you're not alone in your sorrows, trying in his way to offer comfort." I shivered, wondering if the spirit of the musician had tried to comfort the tormented soul in the van, or perhaps even played a part in luring him there. Over time, I've heard others share similar experiences near that curve. Some speak of a cold presence, others of ephemeral shadows in the rearview mirror. As for me, every time I approach the bend, I turn off the radio and listen intently. Sometimes, in the still of the night, the faint strains of a sorrowful violin reach out, and I am reminded that the park, with all its beauty, holds secrets and tales of sorrow intertwined amidst its ancient trees. Story 4. Vanished in the Park. On an overcast September day in 1938, the gritty streets of Brooklyn welcomed the cries of newborn Martin Braxton Hartman. His parents, both born beneath the vast Texan skies, decided to seek solace within the familiar terrains of the Lone Star State as the shadows of World War II loomed large. Nestled in a quaint two-bedroom house in Fort Worth, little Martin was the first in a line of 6 siblings that followed. From early days, Martin was different. There was something about the soil that seemed to call out to him, an innate knack for nurturing plants that left his parents wide-eyed. This wasn't his only gift. Animals too were drawn to him, including a rambunctious crow that became more of a friend than a pet. The bird followed Martin everywhere, its black eyes always full of mischief. But like many young souls, he felt the weight of authority pressing down on him, a burden forged from his rigid father's constant discipline. As Martin grew, this disdain for the higher powers that sought to shape his life only intensified. He wore his rebellion like a badge, challenging authority at every turn, be it his refusal to sign a loyalty oath in college, or raising his voice against the Vietnam War. One particular summer day in '62, the Hartman household buzzed with anticipation. A friend of Martin's sister was coming over, bringing with her the latest dance moves from the city. But as Lorraine entered the house, she didn't find the Hartman sisters awaiting her arrival. Instead, her gaze landed on Martin, sporting a classic crew cut and glasses reminiscent of Buddy Holly. Their conversation veered into an unexpected territory, the deep lore of Inuit culture. The quirkiness in his delivery was undeniable, and the connection between the two grew as Martin pulled out his gun, trying to impress Lorraine, who, unbeknownst to many, was quite the firearms aficionado. Martin's once peaceful household was thrown into a frenzy as his sisters felt robbed of their dance day. Yet neither Lorraine nor Martin seemed to care. The world faded as their feelings for each other deepened. Despite his outward apathy, Martin was a hidden gem within his university's botany department. His professors marveled at his talent, ranking him among the best they had ever taught. His prowess was so renowned that following a mysterious vanishing act, a new plant species was christened in his name, the Amazonia fugadi. Upon graduation, Martin was torn. The allure of a lucrative job at Utah's Dugway Proving Ground beckoned him. But his heart yearned for something else, the rugged embrace of nature. Heeding its call, Martin joined the National Park Service, marrying his sweetheart Lorraine in the cold of December '64. The couple found themselves amidst the breathtaking landscapes of the Carlsbad Caverns in New Mexico, eventually making their way to the Navajo National Monument in Arizona. However, life had its own trials. Martin's superiors at Navajo were not too fond of his bohemian lifestyle. The constant friction between Martin's rebellious spirit and the establishment became too much. Before long, in 1970, Martin was transferred to the Shirakawa's National Monument, a place that offered a decade of peace. However, on a fateful day in January 1980, Martin left the visitor center of Shirakawa. "I'll scout the trail," he mentioned casually, adding that if he didn't return by late afternoon, they should lock up without him. Hours turned into days. The chilling realization dawned on everyone. Martin was gone. As the twilight deepened, the superintendent reached out to the authorities, and a desperate search began, echoing with calls of Martin's name. But he was nowhere to be found. The vast expanses of Shirakawa seemed to have swallowed him whole. The following days in the park were a hive of activity. The authorities, understanding the gravity of the situation, immediately spearheaded an extensive search and rescue operation. Almost 30 dedicated rangers and officers roamed every inch of the grounds, and their efforts were soon bolstered by a National Guard chopper. They were joined by 16 selfless volunteers from the Southern Arizona Rescue Association. But even with this massive deployment of resources, the initial 2-week search was fruitless. Undeterred, Lorraine, Martin's anchor and confidant, took the mantle of hope upon herself. For months, and then years, she led volunteer search groups, revisiting trails that Martin might have taken, inspecting desolate mines, organizing benefit concerts, and constantly knocking on the doors of local politicians. Their dedication was unwavering, yet destiny remained silent. One of the leading theories, as dark as it was, came from an investigator for the sheriff's department. Cochise County, which shared a significant border with Mexico, was unfortunately familiar to drug traffickers and smugglers. The investigator postulated that Martin might have unwittingly crossed paths with such unsavory characters. The theory weighed heavy on everyone's minds. Could Martin, always open-hearted and friendly, have ended up as an unfortunate casualty in a sinister trade? As the days turned into weeks and then years, Martin's mysterious absence became a grim legend. He was the only Park Service ranger to ever disappear without a trace. His ghostly absence hung over those involved in the case. A retired detective who once officially worked the case began to revisit the mystery, re-interviewing old contacts and treading old trails. By 2018, the reward for any shred of credible information regarding Martin's whereabouts was significantly increased, but the void remained. In desperation, Lorraine once turned to a psychic who claimed to detect a time portal within a house Martin once visited. This seer, with misty eyes, described a harrowing vision where Martin was force-fed a drug and then smuggled across the border into Mexico. Lorraine was visibly shaken, not by a belief in mysticism, but because of an eerily similar incident in 2014. A Park Service employee named Janet Rodriguez had faced a life-threatening encounter with an alleged drug smuggler from Mexico, very near to where Martin had last been seen. Could there be a link? However, the most chilling clue came 5 days after Martin's disappearance. Alan Turner, a Park Service volunteer, came forward with a haunting observation. While driving, he claimed to have seen Martin, looking despondent, sandwiched between 2 men in a speeding pickup truck. Alan's vivid details, down to the truck's green hue and the apparel of the alleged abductors, sent shivers down the spines of investigators. One officer even had Alan undergo deep hypnosis, hoping to extract more minute details. But despite Alan's sincere account, it gave the supposed perpetrators a week's lead. Yet, in the grand tapestry of events and speculations, concrete evidence was scarce. As a detective grimly noted, the only irrefutable fact was Martin's disappearance, and beyond that, shadows loomed large. As 1980's summer sun shone down on the park, rumors had taken root deep within the community. The theories and suppositions had crystallized into 2 main hypotheses. The first was spearheaded by a dogged Park Service investigator named Larry Edwards. He asserted that Martin, amidst personal and professional turmoil, had deliberately abandoned his responsibilities and commitments. Edwards's theory was bolstered by some salacious details that had bubbled to the surface. It emerged that Martin, after over a decade of matrimonial bliss, had strayed into a forbidden affair with a young woman barely out of her teens. This liaison, passionate and reckless, had led to an unintended pregnancy. The young woman, trapped in the complexities of the situation, had undergone an abortion. However, Edwards argued that while there was no financial reason such as child support to drive Martin away, the emotional whirlwind of guilt, betrayal, and regret might have. He insinuated that Martin, overwhelmed by these powerful emotions, might have sought refuge in a new, unknown life. But another detective, the astute criminal investigator Simon Rowland, sang a different tune. Rowland was convinced that Martin was a victim of foul play. The breadcrumbs of evidence, the human connections, and gut intuition all told him that the narrative of Martin walking away from life voluntarily was severely flawed. Rowland held Lorraine's accounts of her husband's state of mind in high regard. She painted a picture of a man who, despite his recent mistakes, remained rooted in love and responsibility. Rowland also placed considerable weight on Alan Turner's unsettling witness account. He speculated that Martin could have been the unfortunate catch in the net of a smuggling syndicate. And then there were those cryptic letters. Anonymous notes sent in crude block print, pointing Rowland towards certain inmates in Phoenix's county jail. The letters implicated individuals named Victor Harris and Clyde Farmer in Martin's possible murder. Farmer's tale was one of dramatic twists and turns. Initially, he claimed to have witnessed Martin's murder and even helped bury his body. But, under what seemed like the shadowy influence of the prison's Celtic Brotherhood chapter, his story changed, wavered, and finally dissolved into ambiguity. Victor Harris, on the other hand, remained an enigma, adamantly denying any role and refusing cooperation. With the eventual deaths of these two men, the chilling whispers of their potential involvement in Martin's fate were silenced forever. Amid these spirals of mysteries, a curious cloud of suspicion even hovered over Lorraine for a brief moment. Just 2 weeks after Martin's vanishing act, she had inquired about his retirement benefits, an action that struck many as premature and suspicious. Lorraine defended herself, explaining that in those tumultuous times, she was just trying to prepare for any eventuality. This led to a polygraph test, where, armed with a lawyer, a confidant, and a tape recorder, she faced her interrogators. The results? A strong indication that she spoke the truth about her innocence. Yet the enigma deepened. Among the remnants of Martin's life, investigators stumbled upon unfinished life insurance paperwork and a peculiar check penned by Lorraine to Martin. Some thought these were remnants of an insurance scheme, a dark plot to craft a new life from a simulated death. But what sent genuine chills down the spine was a letter, discovered in one of Lorraine's files, penned by Martin himself. Along with a handwritten will, this correspondence ominously hinted that Martin might have sensed the shadows lurking around him. The letter, dated December 24, 1978, rested in Lorraine's hands. Its implications weighed heavy on her heart and the heart of the investigation. Just over a year before Martin's inexplicable vanishing act, he penned a message of foreboding. The chilling opening line read, "You won't be opening this unless something bad has happened, or at least I hope not." It echoed the haunting uncertainty that plagued Lorraine's nights. In the lines that followed, Martin's profound love for Lorraine was undeniable, even in the shadows of his perceived imperfections and the turbulence their relationship had endured. It was evident he sought to provide her with guidance from beyond the grave. His words outlined specific advice, from the sale of his prized rifles to the somber request for a modest burial. A pragmatic man, even in the face of the unknown, he offered her a roadmap to claim his government death benefits. And in the same breath, with a heartfelt note of encouragement, he assured her of her strengths and capabilities to thrive in a world without him. However, these words would birth numerous interpretations. Some whispered that this letter bore the signs of a premeditated escape plan, that perhaps Lorraine was privy to Martin's plans of clandestine existence, far from the shackles of his past. Lorraine, caught in a storm of grief and uncertainty, vehemently denied these theories. She proclaimed that if Martin were truly out there, breathing the same air, she would feel his presence. Her heart, she claimed, would never be able to masquerade its joy or maintain the facade of inconsolable loss for this long. And perhaps the loudest testament to her undying love was the solitude she chose after Martin's vanishing. She didn't let another man occupy the space Martin left, and her closest confidant in these trying times was none other than Martin's own sister. To this day, Martin's name stands out in the annals of the National Park Service. His distinction? the only park ranger in the vast tapestry of U.S. history to vanish without a trace. Some say he chose the shadows, carving a new life where his past couldn't reach him. Yet others, perhaps more cynical or realistic, believed that someone out there ensured Martin's story remained untold. For as the age-old adage goes, dead men tell no tales. The haunting notes of uncertainty still resonate and perhaps always will.